Welcome to an interview in history, where imagination meets reality. In this episode, we bring you an imaginary interview, but with real people and real facts. While the conversation you're about to hear is a creative reimagining, every detail, every event, and every quote is grounded in truth. It's a different way to explore real stories, and we can't wait for you to experience it. This week on An Interview in History, we're talking with George Smith Patton Jr., who was a general in the United States Army, who commanded the 7th Army in the Mediterranean theater of World War II, then the 3rd Army in France and Germany after the Allied invasion of Normandy in June of 1944. This interview takes place on May 14, 1944. General George S. Patton, thank you for joining us. Let's start at the beginning. Could you tell us a bit about your childhood?
Glad to be here. I was born on November 11, 1885 in San Gabriel, California. I grew up on my family's ranch. My father, George Smith Patton Sr., was a lawyer and politician, and my mother, Ruth Wilson, came from a military family. You could say the Army was in my blood. My grandfather fought for the Confederacy, and stories of war were as common in our home as breakfast.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had one sister, Nita. We were close growing up. She was bright and supportive, and though our paths were quite different, I always valued her presence.
What was your schooling like?
Well, I didn't learn to read until I was about 12. People think that's odd, but I was determined. I eventually attended the Virginia Military Institute for a year before getting into West Point. I graduated in 1909, near the bottom of my class academically, but high in military training. Numbers weren't my strength, but tactics and leadership? That's where I shine.
What first drew you to the military?
I always knew I wanted to be a soldier. My heroes were warriors, Alexander the Great, Napoleon. As a boy, I'd march around the yard with a wooden sword. I believed that glory and honor were found on the battlefield. I just didn't want to serve. I wanted to be great.
Did you marry and have children?
Yes, I married Beatrice Ayer in 1910 at age 24. She was the daughter of a wealthy Boston businessman, and she stood by me through all the postings, the trainings, and the wars. We had 3 children, Beatrice, Ruth Ellen, and George Jr., who followed me into the Army.
You were in both World War I and II. What do you consider to be your greatest triumphs?
That's a fine question. Yes, I served in both World Wars, and each taught me something different. In World War I, I served under General Pershing in the newly formed U.S. Tank Corps. It was the birth of armored warfare, and I was right there at the start. I led America's first tank attack at St. Mihiel in 1918. We were learning as we went, but I saw the potential of tanks to break the stalemate of trench warfare. I took a bullet in the leg from the front, damn near died, but I never regretted it. That experience laid the groundwork for everything I would do later. In World War II, I had many moments I'd call triumphs, but 2 stand out. First was the Sicily campaign in 1943. I took command of the 7th Army and drove through that island like thunder. People said I was reckless. Hell, maybe I was. But we beat the Germans and Italians and reached Messina before the British. That campaign proved American forces could outfight anyone. But my greatest triumph? Without question, leading the 3rd Army across France in 1944. After the Normandy breakout, we advanced over 100 miles in a matter of days, liberating countless towns, And during the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans launched their last major offensive, my army pivoted on short notice through snow and ice and relieved the 101st Airborne in Bastogne. No other army on earth could have done that. That's not arrogance. That's fact. I didn't win battles with numbers. I won them with speed, surprise, and sheer will. That was my gift. That was my triumph. Then let's talk specifically about World War II. Where were you stationed when the war began? When war broke out in Europe, I was building America's armored forces. By the time we entered the war, I led the Western Task Force during Operation Torch in North Africa. That was in 1942. From there, I took command in Tunisia, then led the 7th Army in Sicily in 1943. You mentioned that Sicily was a significant campaign. How so? Well, simply said, we outmaneuvered the Germans and Italians, beating Montgomery to Messina. That campaign proved the importance of speed and aggression. Of course, it also brought controversy. I slapped a couple of soldiers I thought were shirking their duty. It was wrong, and I apologized, but I never doubted the need to maintain discipline. So let's talk about slapping a soldier. I understand that it happened in Sicily. Are you willing to talk more about that incident? Sure, why not? There were 2 incidents of me striking subordinates during the Sicily campaign that attracted national controversy following the end of the campaign. On August 3, 1943, I slapped and verbally abused Private Charles H. Cool at an evacuation hospital in Nicosia after he had been found to suffer from battle fatigue. Then on the 10th of August, I slapped Private Paul G. Bennett under similar circumstances. I ordered both soldiers back in the front lines. I hated cowardice and issued orders to my commanders to discipline any soldier making similar complaints. Word of the incident reached Eisenhower, who privately reprimanded me and insisted I apologize. I apologized to both soldiers individually as well as to the doctors who witnessed the incidents, and later to all of the soldiers under my command in several speeches. Eisenhower suppressed the incident in the media, but in November, journalist Drew Pearson revealed it on his radio program. Criticism of me in the United States was harsh and included members of Congress and former generals, Pershing amongst them. The views of the general public remained mixed on the matter, and eventually Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson stated I must be retained as a commander because of the need for my aggressive, winning leadership in the bitter battles which are to come before final victory. Then you later commanded the Third Army in France, correct? Yes. In 1944, after the Normandy landings, the Third Army broke out of the hedgerows and surged across France like lightning. We liberated town after town. The Battle of the Bulge was a turning point. My army turned north on a dime and relieved Bastogne in brutal winter conditions. Some say it was one of the greatest maneuvers of the war. Then what happened after Germany surrendered? I stayed in Germany as a military governor. I spoke out about the denazification process. Some thought I was too lenient. Truth is, I was more focused on preventing the spread of communism. I believed the next threat was the Soviets. Some thought me too blunt. Maybe I was. You've also been known to have quite a colorful image. Tell me about that. I guess you could say that. My so-called colorful image, hard-driving personality, and success as a commander were, at times, overshadowed by my controversial public statements. My philosophy of leading from the front and my ability to inspire troops with attention-getting, vulgarity-laden speeches, such as my famous address to the Third Army, was received favorably by my troops. but much less so by a sharply divided Allied high command. I sent task force bound to liberate my son-in-law, Lieutenant Colonel John K. Waters, from a prisoner of war camp damaged my standing with my superiors. My emphasis on rapid and aggressive offensive action proved effective, and I was regarded highly by my opponents in the German high command. Did you ever truly retire? Not in spirit. You left behind a legendary legacy. How do you hope people remember you? As a man who believed in duty, honor, and country. A man who led from the front and demanded the best from his men. I wasn't always liked, but I got the job done. Wars aren't won by hesitation. They're won by boldness, by courage, and by belief in victory. Thank you, General. Thank you, and God bless America. Patton's Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, invited him on a pheasant hunting trip on the 9th of December 1945, near Speyer, Germany, to lift his spirits. He noted derelict cars along the side of the road and said, "How awful war is. Think of the waste." Moments later, the 1938 Cadillac limousine driven by Private First Class Horace Woodring collided with an American Army truck driven by T5 Robert L. Thompson. Patton's regular driver was Sergeant Francis Jeep Stanza, but he had left the Army in November 1945. Gay and others were only slightly injured, but Patton hit his head on the glass partition that separated the front and back seats. He began bleeding from a gash to the head and complained that he was paralyzed and having trouble breathing. He was taken to a hospital in Heidelberg, where he was found to have a compression fracture and dislocation of the cervical third and fourth vertebrae, resulting in a broken neck and cervical spinal cord injury that rendered him paralyzed from the neck down. Patton spent most of the next 12 days in spinal traction to decrease the pressure on his spine. All non-medical visitors were prohibited except his wife Beatrice, who had flown from the U.S. Patton had been told that he had no chance to ever again ride a horse or resume normal life. And he commented, "This is a hell of a way to die." He died in his sleep of pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure at 6:00 p.m. on the 21st of December, 1945, at age 60. On December 24th, Patton was buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery and Memorial in the Ham district of Luxembourg City, alongside some wartime casualties of the Third Army, in accordance with his request to be buried with his men. He was initially buried in the middle of the plot, like every other service member, but the large number of visitors to his grave damaged the cemetery grounds, so his remains were moved to their current location at the front of the grave plots. And now, another forgotten history. Today I should have been 94. If life had been kind, I would have had a big birthday party today, with cake, laughter, and love all around. 2 wonderful sons, a sweet daughter too, grandchildren to hug and cherish. I would have met a tall, handsome man. He would have worked in the city. We would have lived in the countryside, with 2 dogs, a cat, and the joy in our home. Margot, my dear sister, would have lived close by. A mother herself, maybe, while our parents beamed with pride. We would have toasted life to health, to love. But instead, we slept on hard wooden beds, shivering from hunger and cold. We were punished for reasons we couldn't control, and there were no toys, only pain. My mother, starving herself to feed us, fell weaker every day. The camp was full of sickness, and rats lived where we stayed. I dreamed of meals I'd never taste, potatoes, bread, maybe meat. I imagined washing it down with wine, and a treat, something sweet. My best friend was in another camp, her laugh a memory that kept me going. At least I had Margot on my side. Loneliness was the hardest part. Then came typhus, and we fell ill. Doctors didn't come, no help arrived. Margot left first, then it was my turn. For us, death was mercy. I hoped our lives weren't wasted. I hope the world remembers. Hatred destroys everything. Let my diary be a lesson. This was in memory of Anne Frank, 1929 to 1945. Join us next week when we talk with George Kelly Barnes, also known as Machine Gun Kelly, who was an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, active during the Prohibition era. His nickname came from his favorite weapon, a Thompson submachine gun. Until then, take care.